Commercial aviation is one of the most monitored and regulated forms of transportation in the modern world, which is why cases involving aircraft that vanish without a clear explanation remain deeply unsettling and difficult to reconcile with assumptions of technological reliability and constant global surveillance. This story focuses on a real aviation mystery involving a flight that departed as scheduled, followed its planned route, and maintained normal communication before ultimately failing to arrive at its destination, leaving behind questions that official investigations have not fully resolved. The aircraft involved was operating a routine commercial service, carrying passengers and crew whose identities, tickets, and travel plans were fully documented, eliminating any doubt that the flight itself was real and properly authorized. Weather conditions along the planned route were monitored and considered within acceptable operational limits, with no immediate indication that extreme meteorological events would force an emergency diversion or grounding prior to departure. Air traffic control records show that the flight maintained normal radio contact during the early stages of its journey, reporting no mechanical problems, unusual behavior, or distress signals. Standard procedures require continuous monitoring of altitude, speed, and heading, all of which initially appeared consistent with the flight plan filed before takeoff. At a certain point during the flight, communication with the aircraft ceased unexpectedly, without any prior warning, emergency call, or indication of escalating technical difficulty. The sudden loss of contact immediately triggered concern among air traffic controllers, as modern aircraft are designed with multiple redundant communication systems. Attempts to re-establish radio contact were unsuccessful, prompting controllers to alert nearby aircraft and initiate emergency protocols. When the flight failed to arrive at its destination within the expected time window, it became clear that an abnormal and potentially serious incident had occurred. Search and rescue operations were launched rapidly, involving aviation authorities, military assets, and emergency response teams tasked with locating the missing aircraft. Initial search areas were based on the aircraft's last known position, radar data, and projected flight path, creating a defined zone of interest for recovery efforts. Despite extensive aerial and maritime searches, no immediate wreckage, debris, or emergency signals were detected within the expected area. The absence of physical evidence during early search phases raised concerns, as aircraft accidents typically leave identifiable debris fields or signal transmissions. Investigators began reviewing radar records more closely, examining whether the aircraft had deviated from its assigned route before disappearing. Radar data suggested no abrupt changes in altitude or heading prior to the loss of contact, complicating theories involving sudden mechanical failure or pilot error. Maintenance records were scrutinized to determine whether the aircraft had any unresolved technical issues or recent repairs that could have contributed to an in-flight emergency. These records showed no major concerns that would normally justify grounding the aircraft or raising safety alarms. Attention then shifted to cockpit voice recordings and flight data systems, though accessing such information required recovery of onboard recording devices. Without physical access to these systems, investigators were forced to rely on indirect evidence and reconstruction based on available data. The lack of a distress signal was particularly troubling, as crews are trained to transmit emergency codes even under severe conditions. This silence suggested either a sudden incapacitation or a scenario in which the crew was unable to communicate. As days passed without discovery, public concern grew, and the incident began to attract international attention. Media coverage emphasized the mystery of how a modern aircraft could simply vanish in controlled airspace. Aviation experts offered cautious commentary, stressing the limits of available information and the need for systematic investigation. Authorities avoided premature conclusions, focusing instead on gathering verified data and coordinating search efforts. Families of passengers faced uncertainty, receiving limited updates as search operations continued without definitive results. This emotional dimension underscored the human cost of unresolved aviation incidents. As the search expanded, investigators considered less conventional possibilities, while remaining grounded in documented evidence. Satellite data, radar gaps, and communication handoffs between control regions were examined for inconsistencies. Each system involved in tracking the flight was reviewed to identify potential failures or blind spots. The complexity of global air traffic management revealed how even advanced systems rely on multiple interconnected components. Any failure or gap within this network could contribute to incomplete information during critical moments. Investigators emphasized that disappearance does not necessarily imply destruction, though the absence of contact made survival scenarios increasingly uncertain. The case highlighted the limitations of surveillance coverage in certain regions, despite advances in aviation technology. As search efforts continued with diminishing leads, questions began to outweigh answers. Why was no emergency signal transmitted? Why was no debris immediately located? Why did monitoring systems provide so little clarity? Each unanswered question deepened the mystery surrounding the flight. Official statements acknowledged the unusual nature of the case, while reaffirming commitment to continued investigation. Analysts began comparing the incident to other historical aviation disappearances. Similarities and differences were noted, though none provided a direct explanation. The flight became defined not by what was known, but by what could not be confirmed. At this stage, the incident stood as a reminder that even routine flights can enter unexplained silence. As the search extended over wider areas, investigators reassessed assumptions about the aircraft's trajectory, considering whether unexpected deviations or unreported course changes could have moved the plane beyond initial search zones. Ocean currents, wind patterns, and fuel endurance calculations were incorporated into updated models, altering predictions about where wreckage might realistically be found if the aircraft had gone down. Despite these refinements, repeated search efforts failed to locate conclusive physical evidence, reinforcing concerns that the disappearance involved circumstances not accounted for in standard accident scenarios. Attention turned to potential failures in tracking systems, including gaps in radar coverage and reliance on transponder signals that cease once power is lost or manually disabled. This reliance exposed vulnerabilities in global monitoring infrastructure, particularly over remote regions where continuous surveillance cannot be guaranteed. Investigators examined whether electrical failure could explain the sudden silence, though such a scenario would still likely allow some form of distress transmission. The possibility of rapid decompression or fire was considered, yet these events often leave detectable traces or partial communications before loss of control. Human factors were also analyzed, including crew workload, fatigue, and decision-making under unexpected conditions. Without cockpit recordings or recovered wreckage, these assessments remain speculative rather than evidentiary. Aviation history shows that rare but catastrophic sequences can unfold quickly, leaving little opportunity for corrective action or communication. Still, the absence of any warning continues to distinguish this case from most documented aviation accidents. International aviation authorities collaborated to share data, expertise, and resources, reflecting the seriousness of the unresolved disappearance. Public confidence in aviation safety was tested as the case challenged assumptions about traceability and accountability. Investigators emphasized that disappearance does not equate to impossibility, but rather highlights gaps between expectation and reality. Over time, the lack of findings shifted the investigation from recovery toward analysis and prevention. Recommendations emerged aimed at improving aircraft tracking, data transmission, and real-time monitoring. These changes acknowledged that existing systems were not infallible, particularly in extreme or unexpected scenarios. The mystery also influenced public discourse about transparency and information sharing during aviation crises. Families of those on board continued to seek clarity, confronting prolonged uncertainty without definitive answers. The emotional impact persisted long after search operations scaled back. As official investigations concluded without resolution, the case entered the category of unsolved aviation mysteries. It joined a small group of incidents where technology, procedure, and investigation failed to deliver certainty. Analysts revisited the evidence periodically, hoping that new data or methods might one day clarify what happened. Advances in satellite tracking and data analytics renewed interest, though no breakthroughs emerged. The disappearance remained defined by absence rather than discovery. Each theory explained some aspects while leaving critical questions unanswered. Mechanical failure, human error, environmental factors, and systemic limitations were all considered without definitive confirmation. The case underscores how complex systems can fail in unexpected ways. It also illustrates how modern confidence in technology can be challenged by rare events. The flight's fate remains unknown, despite extensive effort and international cooperation. Its story continues to be referenced in discussions about aviation safety and system resilience. The mystery persists because evidence remains incomplete. Without physical confirmation, certainty cannot be achieved. The disappearance serves as a reminder of the limits of monitoring and control. It highlights how unanswered questions can endure even in highly regulated environments. The incident remains studied not for sensationalism, but for the lessons it may still offer. It challenges assumptions about constant visibility in modern transportation. The case reflects the tension between expectation and reality. As time passes, the absence of answers becomes part of the story itself. The flight exists in records, memories, and unresolved files. Its silence continues to provoke investigation and reflection. The mystery endures because resolution remains elusive. Modern aviation has learned from the unknown as much as from confirmed failures. The unanswered questions remain. The facts are real. The explanation is up to you.